Corbyn fights on tonight, whatever the clamour for him to go.
That is why I'm very proud to be carrying on with that work. And carrying on is exactly what we're doing. Thank you very much.
On another perilous day for Labour, ITV News believes he considered quitting but pulled back from the brink. Even the Prime Minister piled on the pressure.
It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest, and I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go!
Tonight, with big question marks over the leadership of both our major parties, we'll have all the latest. Also on News at 10 tonight. The EU bites back. Leaders warn they won't climb down on immigration. Terror in the terminal, the chilling images of the Istanbul airport attack. And the British underdog with a bulldog spirit meets Federer at Wimbledon.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening and welcome to what is becoming a nightly post-Brexit trip into uncharted political waters. Tonight we'll start with Jeremy Corbyn. ITV News understands he'd actually had enough and considered calling it a day as Labour leader, but his advisers insisted he stay in post. Then this evening, he got the backing of the trades unions and in a rallying speech in London, promised to carry on the work he was elected to do. But Mr Corbyn will face a challenger. Tomorrow afternoon, Angela Eagle will confirm she wants to stand for the job.
Jeremy Corbyn did try to continue with the duties of opposition leader today. There was an important and very necessary visit to a Polish centre, which had since the referendum suffered from racial abuse. At one stage, he looked as if he was prepared to talk about his leadership troubles.
Mr Corbyn, a quick question about the leadership.
But his media handlers showed in a very physical way they weren't going to let that happen. And it was in the car on the way back from here that Labour Deputy Leader Tom Watson urged Mr Corbyn to resign. The leader would not.
I went to see Jeremy today to see whether we could sort of find a way of getting a negotiated settlement, but he was unwilling to move from the position he's in, so we're still in an impasse, I'm afraid.
And impasse this certainly was. Because tonight he met supporters, most of them students.
I'm very proud to be carrying on with that work, and carrying on is exactly what we're doing. Thank you very much.
Moments earlier, the unions announced their support for Mr Corbyn. He should not be challenged, they said. But worryingly for the leader, they did add, unless it happens through the proper procedures.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
Earlier in the day, there was a punishing Prime Minister's questions and not for the Prime Minister. Mr Corbyn's new shadow cabinet was sitting either side of him. The old one had walked out after the weekend. And throughout, Labour MPs sat in silence as their leader tried to plough on.
The Prime Minister has 2 months left. Will he leave a one-nation legacy?
But from David Cameron, who just lost a referendum and resigned his own leadership, this.
And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he talks about job insecurity and my 2 months to go. It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest, and I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go!
That was something you don't see and hear every day. On the Labour benches, they simply shuffled their feet, and as they left, the former party leader decided he should call for Mr Corbyn to go.
People from all wings of the party in Parliament have lost confidence in Jeremy, so sadly I believe he has to go.
But if he won't go of his own volition, the party is expecting this MP, Angela Eagle, to make it happen.
I'm not giving any comments today. I'm going to get in my car and go to work.
Barring an unexpected resignation from the leader, she will formally challenge Mr Corbyn tomorrow afternoon.
I just expect everybody to play by the rules. If they would like Jeremy to go, stand a candidate, there'll be a democratic election. If Jeremy wins, he'll be back in position again. If he doesn't, there'll be another leader of the Labour Party.
You might well agree it's a slow-motion car crash, but it's not over yet.
And Chris, unsurprisingly, is still in Westminster tonight. Chris, absolute standoff ahead of tomorrow. Then where does this go next, do you reckon?
We know, Julie, I'm sure there are probably one or two viewers tonight who are wondering how the leader of a major party, Her Majesty's opposition no less, can lose most of the shadow cabinet, can have 172 MPs vote that they have no confidence in the leader, can have the former leader and the former acting leader in Ed Miliband and Harriet Harman both say that it's time for him to go. And yet tonight, as far as I'm aware, he is still in post. And that is because, as we discussed many times on this programme, Jeremy Corbyn takes his marching orders not from MPs here, but from the party members who all gave him that huge mandate when they elected him back in September. And you will hear his office say again and again he was democratically elected to do this job. The trouble is, so too was the Deputy Leader Tom Watson. So I think because he too said today that Jeremy Corbyn should go, that is pretty significant. Now, I understand that Jeremy Corbyn has considered leaving the post, throwing in the towel, call it what you will, but his closest advisor, plus the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, has urged him not to do so. His office deny that, but I think it shows the pressure that's going on, and the conversations that are going on in that office are pretty intense.
Indeed, Chris, thank you for that. Well, while we await Angela Eagle's challenge for the Labour leadership, the contest to be the next Conservative leader and indeed Prime Minister is up and running. Nominations open tonight. The former Defence Secretary Liam Fox and the Work and Pensions Secretary Stephen Crabb, the self-styled blue-collar candidate, made their pitches for the job. The bigger names have until noon tomorrow to make theirs.
Stephen Crabb.
The candidate, the first, in fact, for the vacancy at the top of the Tory party and at number 10.
I was brought up to understand that nothing gets handed to you on a plate. On the rainy rugby fields of West Wales, I learnt that it's not a question of waiting for the ball to pop out of the back of the scrum. If you want it, you do what's required and you get your hands on it.
Not an Etonian like the current Prime Minister and Boris Johnson, brought up on a council estate by a single mum in Wales. The Work and Pension Secretary says he's the man to unite a Conservative Party split by the European Union vote.
The message that I'm communicating through my leadership bid is that the quicker that we move past the labels of Remain and Leave, the better.
You said that you want our economic relationship with the European Union to be as close as it is now, but you also said that you want to control immigration. Now, many people would say that's being either naive or disingenuous.
What came out really, really clear to us during the referendum campaign was that the thing that mattered most for the people of this country was actually getting back control of our immigration. No more open borders. Now, it is going to be very challenging to reconcile that with the same kind of full access to the single market that we have at the moment.
But another potential challenger disagrees that immigration control trumps prosperity.
If we want that strong economy to carry on delivering, obviously, on our public service and everything else, immigration and people coming here to work is a key part of that. It's essential both for business but for our public services.
Now, the big hitters, Boris Johnson and Theresa May, will join the contest tomorrow.
I think Theresa is somebody who actually, when it comes to that negotiating table, there's going to be some really tough, serious negotiations to be had going forward. Her track record of doing exactly that in Europe, I think, speaks for itself.
Boris is somebody who's advocated leave. People trust him to deliver on that, and that is incredibly important.
Boris Johnson and Liam Fox, a team only a few days ago in the battle over our European future, enemies tomorrow when both of them announce that they're running to be leader of the Tory party and our future Prime Minister. A wind of change from Europe for Conservative Party and country.
So where do we start, Robert? Should we start with this email from Michael Gove's wife that's caused a bit of a flutter this evening?
The email which Sky News got hold of, sent apparently to a member of the public by mistake. It draws back the veil, certainly, on the anxieties of one member of the Gove household. She says to him, you've basically got to, get a guarantee from Boris Johnson of a top job because he needs you. He needs you because party members don't trust him enough. And this is the bit that caused, I think, a bit of a frisson. Rupert Murdoch and Paul Dacre trust you, but they don't trust Boris. Now, some people saw this as a sort of, drawing back the veil on deals with the media elite from individuals who claim to be against the elite, certainly the elite in Brussels. So all amusing, but
all
for
adds
them,
grist to the
slightly
contest.
embarrassing.
Yeah, and let's look at that very specifically for the contest for Boris. We've got news of backers. We know we're anticipating the Home Secretary making her announcement tomorrow too.
So contest just started. We will see tomorrow the big beasts enter the fray, Theresa May and Boris Johnson. And my goodness, there is already bad blood between them. I've had briefings from both of them about, Boris Johnson says that she has repulsed a perfectly sensible attempt to form an entente. She says that she never agreed to any kind of meeting to discuss an entente. Then in tomorrow's Times, we've got an article from her in which she says she understands hardship. Rather implication that he doesn't really understand the tougher conditions that many people live through. She says politics is not a game, which rather implies that he thinks it's all a game. And they are both claiming tomorrow that they are the people to unify the party and unify the country. I've got to tell you, there's no signs of unity between the two of them.
OK, Robert, thank you. Well, meanwhile, back in the heart of Europe, Brussels and the other 27 countries met without the UK for the first time for 43 years. It makes it sound pretty final, doesn't it? And Britain's absence certainly didn't seem to make their hearts grow any fonder. Their message? The UK cannot have its own à la carte access to the single market. It has to accept free movement of people. And if Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was hoping for a special deal for Scotland, she got a pretty firm no or nine as well.
The leaders of Europe have a little more elbow room around the top table these days. For the first time in 43 years, the British seat is empty. The symbolism is powerful, but so is the message the 27 are sending. Britain's not going to be able to form alliances or seek separate deals. And on the central question of access to the single market, while restricting freedom of movement, no compromise. They hear news from London that Boris Johnson is now pledging, no less, that the UK can both, point 3, control our borders, and point 4, trade freely in the single market. This, they point out, is not in his gift.
Access to the single market requires acceptance of all 4 freedoms, including the freedom of movement. There will be no single market à la carte.
And from the French today, a direct threat to the City of London that much of its euro trading will now be forced to move to the Eurozone. They have to understand, said President Hollande, that they can't just hang on to their existing advantages. You can't just say, what we have, we keep, what you have, we negotiate over. That doesn't work. There was one British leader in Brussels today as the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon toured the Parliament and the Commission on a simple mission.
I'm here to protect Scotland's place in Europe.
At this stage, it doesn't seem Brussels can do much for her beyond laying the groundwork for a future relationship.
Is it realistic that you can actually stay in, or is it just getting a better deal for Scotland when the UK leaves?
Look, Scotland voted to stay in, and as First Minister, I've got a duty to seek to give effect to what people in Scotland voted for. So look, I don't underestimate the difficulty of the process that lies ahead or the challenging path that we face, but I'm determined to do everything I can to try to give effect to what people in Scotland voted for.
But they're already running into some headwinds, with the Spanish Prime Minister saying today he'll block any separate deal with Scotland. If the UK leaves, Scotland leaves, he says. They have their own separatist problem in Catalonia and don't want to encourage breakaways. So for the time being, it's just a polite hearing.
Scotland won the right to be heard in Brussels, so I will listen carefully to what the First Minister will tell me.
These are early days, and Scotland is still seen as an internal British issue. But when the UK does put itself on the Article 50 conveyor belt to the exit, expect to see the Scots hear a great deal more. James Mates, News at 10, Brussels.
And later on in the programme, away from Brussels and the political hothouse of Westminster, we'll be out in the British countryside, where many Leave voters are furious that so many politicians have been dismissive of the result.
I resent their comments. I knew exactly what I was voting for. I was voting to get my country clear of Brussels and the bureaucracy that comes out of it.
More on that a little later. But first, the numbers and nationalities of those who died in last night's Istanbul airport attack have been filtering out during the day. It doesn't look at the moment as though there were any Britons among the 41 dead. Survivors have been giving their accounts, but the real sense of shock comes from seeing the CCTV pictures of what happened.
A sleeper cell ordered to attack. One moment, they're rushing for their flights. Then, for their lives, as gunfire and explosions break out. It becomes clear that the absolutely unthinkable is happening all around them. This was Brussels all over again, but worse, because in peeling away Istanbul's extra layer of security, IS might have just launched one of its most sophisticated attacks yet. This video shows one of the attackers being shot by the police and falling to the ground. The officer inspects his body and runs away. The bomber then detonates his suicide device. But minutes before, the attackers were just faces in the crowd, wearing battlefield black, apparent tourists turned terrorists. It's thought their intention was to take hostages. One used his gun to try to smash into the departure lounge.
We are so scared and just
lay down, and I saw one terrorist broke the window to the gate and running to the plane.
A mother was so convinced she'd be killed, she scrawled her daughter's details on her arm to help someone locate her.
If I kill be alive, his name and phone number and the country to give them my daughter to my family.
This is the view as you drive up to the Ataturk airport and what the suspects would have seen when they were dropped off in a taxi there last night. At the entrance to the international terminal, you must go through X-ray machines. That's before the first security checkpoint. It's where the gunmen are believed to have started shooting. After an exchange of gunfire with police, two of the attackers blew themselves up in the terminal, one in arrivals, the other next to a departure gate. A third is reported to have detonated his device in the airport's car park. Identifying so-called Islamic State as the likely culprits, the Turkish Prime Minister said, terror is a threat to all countries. They must work together against terrorism. But it's a threat to this country more than most. This should have been one of the safest places in Turkey. But the gateway of choice for IS fighters has become a target for one of the most extraordinary assaults.
Well, last night's attack is the latest but not the deadliest over the course of the past year in a complicated security situation in which different terrorist groups are carrying them out. Istanbul's Ataturk airport, the third busiest in Europe, is the most high-profile target. It served 61 million passengers last year, and many of the 2.5 million British tourists who visit Turkey each year pass through there. Yesterday's bombing is the fourth blamed on the so-called Islamic State over the last year, and it seems their campaign is having an effect on tourism. Last month, tourist numbers dropped dramatically by 35%, the biggest slump in 2 decades. Yet the country has been accused of ignoring the danger of IS just across the southern border in Syria. Despite joining the coalition's airstrikes against the extremists last summer, it's concentrated on its conflict with Kurdish separatists. Let's return now to Rohit, who's in Istanbul tonight. Any sense of how Turkey will respond to this attack now, Rohit?
Well, Julie, that is now a question at the very heart of the international war on so-called Islamic State. And there are many people inside this country and, in fact, around the world who believe that 2 years to the day since the declaration of an Islamic State caliphate, Turkey is finally paying the price for not doing enough to confront the problem on its doorstep, for not doing enough to stop the flow of resources and of people. After all, this is the very airport terminal through which thousands of foreign jihadists have travelled in order to get to Syria. Many of its international partners feel it's failed, that it's been distracted by the problem with Kurdish separatists here. However, it's possible that this might now galvanise a response from a country which is dealing with a problem that is in every sense on its doorstep.
OK, Rohit, thank you for that. Well, in the 6 days since the referendum, British politics has, as we said earlier, gone through almost unbelievable change. There have also been many examples of the sinister side of the result, racist threats or attacks. Today, police chiefs put a figure on it. Hate crimes, they say, are up by more than half. So forces are to get more money to try to stamp them out before things get any worse.
Don't chat when you're not The referendum saw much fear, but in the days since, we've seen spasms of hate. This incident, just one of the hate crimes since polling day. Former Tory candidate Zahra Zaidi told News at 10 of the abuse she had experienced.
Since the EU referendum campaign had begun, I have had particularly abuse from online and attacking me for my religion, that I should leave the UK, that various members of my family and community are rapists, bombers, filth, and that they should swim back to where they came.
Today the government felt more had to be done.
The scenes and behaviour we have seen in recent days, including offensive graffiti and abuse hurled at people because they are members of ethnic minorities or because of their nationality, are despicable and shameful.
Since the referendum, reports of hate crime have risen 57%, but perspective is key. There were 85 reports of racially motivated crimes between Thursday and Sunday, compared to 54 reports for the same period 4 weeks ago. But is it linked to the referendum? Analysis of that vote suggests people primarily voted Leave, not because of immigration, but sovereignty. Nonetheless, because immigration featured so highly, something more must be done to reassure migrants.
There's something else, though, I think the government could do itself to reassure Europeans who are anxious. They're not just anxious about being attacked in the street, they're anxious about their long-term status in Britain, and the government hasn't yet given them clear commitments that that won't change.
But baking cakes for Spanish neighbours, wearing safety pins and welcoming T-shirts, this online Twitter campaign shows Brits loving thy neighbour 2016 style. Allegra Stratton, News at 10.
Well, since the vote last Thursday, there's also been a lot of focus on the value of the pound and share prices, both of which fell in the hours and days afterwards. But today, the FTSE is back above where it was last Thursday evening. It finished the day 3.6% up, its highest close since April, in fact. And even the pound regained some of its losses today. A short time ago, it was trading at $1.34, around a cent higher on the day. But even though the traditional, if rather blunt, indicators of Britain's economic health are showing signs of recovery, it doesn't mean the anxiety for businesses has gone away. As our business editor, Joel Hills, now reports, the shock of last week's vote is already being felt around the UK.
First, the aftershock, now a second day of stability. In Europe, in the United States, the financial markets rallied today. But the majority of economists now believe the vote Leave victory means Britain is heading for a recession, albeit a short, shallow one. In the face of intense political uncertainty, projects are being postponed. On this site in Derby, 4 new homes are going up. Before the referendum, the developer had plans for 3 similar sites. Since the vote, 1 has been shelved.
We've got commitments to existing clients. We want to make sure that they're honoured and taken forward. You know, that's our priority number 1, to complete where we are now. It's beyond that we have this sort of grey area that we're sort of saying we're going to take a little step back, see how things pan out over the next 6 to 12 months, and then take a further view after that.
Like Derbyshire, Wales voted Leave last week, even though it has received some of the highest levels of EU funding in Britain. Funding that enables Jenny Hughes to employ 15 people at her education research company. As it stands, those jobs will be lost.
After the current ones, we don't have any more contracts unless we can do something in the next, I'm going to America in July, chasing work over there. Graham is chasing work, so we're twofold strategy. First, we have to chase work outside the EU. Secondly, we moved Pontedusky to Germany and set up a new company in Germany.
Bank share prices haven't recovered. At a conference in London, executives from Barclays, HSBC, Santander and RBS all said they expected growth to slow.
There will be a period of what does this mean, but also just stay calm.
Royal Bank of Scotland insists it's business as usual.
We haven't changed our lending criteria, our risk appetite. Nothing has changed.
But we're headed into a recession, aren't we?
We are open for business and we are open for lending. We're in a very different position from where we were when we had the financial crisis.
This is a test of the new culture at Royal Bank of Scotland. How will you deal with the small businesses and the homeowners that get into trouble in the months ahead?
We're a lot more proactive, and we will be going to customers and talking to them and saying to them, what are the things that we can do to help you?
So optimism is back, but the uncertainty hasn't gone away. Britain is leaving the EU, and until we know what that means, markets will remain unstable. Joel Hills, News at 10.
Well, it'll be a long time, of course, before we can say that the dust has settled on the referendum result. But nearly a week on, we wanted to know whether things are panning out as expected for those who voted leave. Our social affairs editor, Penny Marshall, has been to rural Leicestershire, where 60% voted leave and are happily standing by their choice. Not so happy, though, with the politicians who've tried to dismiss the result.
In the shires that voted leave, there are few regrets about the decision to break free. But at the stables, there is growing frustration with a political leadership seemingly scornful of the people's choice.
I resent their comments. I knew exactly what I was voting for. I was voting to get my country clear of Brussels and the bureaucracy that comes out of it. If it makes me slightly poorer in the aftermath, then so be it. I'm willing to accept that.
But these are the Tory shires where people dance to a different tune to Westminster. Prosperous and nostalgic, Leave won here 3-2.
And here, a week after the vote, they're not talking about immigration. What matters here is independence and national identity.
And political direction on these matters, or rather the lack of it to move forward, is causing concern.
There's been a lot of talk about coming out of something, but not what we've gone into.
And these Leave voters said the politicians were failing to seize an opportunity to forge a new future.
I want the country to regain its identity. Absolutely, I knew what I was doing. I wanted the government to listen, and as much as any people could be turning around saying this is about the European Union, it's not. It's about our country.
And at the local tennis club, there were accusations from Remain supporters that Brexit had been missold.
350 million. Bringing back across the buses.
And suspicion about Leave's backtracking.
I've got this feeling that we're going to end up with this sham anyway, that's going to be actually some version of both sides of the argument, some compromise position.
And a week on, this Leave supporter feels slurred.
People call us ignorant, stupid, ill-educated, ill-informed, misled and racist. I mean, I'm Scottish, my wife's Chinese. I don't see how I can be a racist.
In the Midlands countryside, the message to the people here didn't like the way the politicians have reacted. Penny Marshall, News at 10, Leicestershire.
Well, there was one of those tennis moments today that could probably only happen at Wimbledon. Step forward, Britain's Marcus Willis, ranked 772 in the world, to take on one of the greatest players of all time, Roger Federer, and on centre court too. Willis was cheered to the rafters when he won his first game in the second set. In the end, he lost in 3, but making into Wimbledon at all is pretty good for a man who almost gave up on the game. So what next? A question our man Ian Payne put to his very proud sister and mum after the match.
So what's the plan now? Is he going to sort of knuckle down and become a top English tennis player?
Knuckle down, maybe. All things true, all things possible.
Yeah.
The family of Marcus Willis after his match of a lifetime. And finally, if heavy rain had not drenched northern France 100 years ago this week, the anniversary of the Battle of the Somme would have been today and not delayed by the weather until the 1st of July, the day after tomorrow. How different history could have been. Many, many regiments, British and Empire, suffered terrible losses when they did finally go over the top on that terrible day, but none more so than the 10th West Yorkshire.
There are few places on the Somme where the battlefield is so discernible. But the lush expanse that is the Newfoundland Memorial is also a cemetery, for up to 250 of the missing of 100 years ago are thought to lie here. The site was bought with money raised by the women of Newfoundland. They were determined to honour their fallen husbands, sons and brothers. For the men of Newfoundland, this was the killing field on the Somme. On the morning of the 1st of July 1916, 780 of them went over the top here. 670 were killed or wounded. It's difficult to imagine any other unit suffering more that day. And yet there was one. And here they lie in a beautiful place on a verdant landscape, the unit that suffered the most that dreadful day, the 10th Battalion of the West Yorkshire Regiment. Their casualty rate was 90%.
It's almost beyond belief.
Yeah, I mean, it is actually. I mean, you think about it, by midday on July the 1st, this battlefield that we're actually stood on at the moment will be littered with the dead. Total carnage.
Dave Stowe isn't just a historian, he has family here. His great-uncle Ernest Stowe, who at the age of 26 left his house at Beulah Street in Leeds to sign up and do his bit. His war would last just minutes. Dave comes to his grave as often as he can.
It really is emotional. It's got that pull, that's why I come back every year. It's got such an emotional pull that I feel that need to come back.
Ernest Stowe and the others are remembered at home as well, in a chapel at York Minster Cathedral. 100 years on, the memory is still painful.
Yorkshire is thought to have had more casualties than any other county or region in the United Kingdom.
The 10th West Yorks are regarded as one of the forgotten battalions, mainly because there were so few of them left to tell this, their story. John Irvine, News at 10 on the Somme.
And tomorrow we'll be reporting from the Somme again on the centenary of what would have been the eve of battle. There'll be a special vigil at the Thiepval Memorial in northern France and here at Westminster Abbey and indeed around the country. So join Tom tomorrow for all of that and more, but from me and everyone here, good night.